Okay, so I'm doing my presentation on circled around the Vietnam War, more specifically the Battle of Hamburger Hill. So I made a PowerPoint. I'm gonna attach it more so just so that I can kind of follow along with some of my notes. Um, the Battle of Hamburger Hill began on May 13th of 1969 and ended on May 20th of 1969. It was a part of what they called Operation Apache Snow. So, a little bit of background on that before we talk about Hamburger Hill itself. It was the joint efforts between the United States Army and the Army of the Republic of Vietnam. Um, the whole idea behind it was basically so that they could prevent the People's Army of Vietnam from invading other provinces around it. So, one of them was like Laos. They were trying to avoid, basically, just kind of trying to shut them off and leave them in one spot before they could expand and um, invade the other neighboring towns and all that. So that actually started May 10th of 1969 and ended June 7th of 1969, which is kind of the bigger picture or bigger concept around Hamburger Hill itself, including other battles and other missions that they had. So Hamburger Hill itself was they call it the 10-day battle. It was one of the most controversial battles during the Vietnam War, which makes sense because the Vietnam War itself was very controversial and still is. I'll get into that a little bit more in a little bit. The Vietnamese people called it the Mountain of the Crouching Beast. I don't know how to say it in Vietnamese. I've seen it numerous times. I don't know how to say it, but that's what it translates to. But the United States military planners referred to it as Hill 937, and that was the meters high that the hill itself was. So, for the United States, talking about leadership during this battle, we had General Zayas. His name was Melvin Zayas. He was the United States general that ultimately initiated and planned the attack on Hamburger Hill. The first initial attempt was the 101st Airborne Division. He sent paratroopers in, and ultimately, it was not very successful. The United States soldiers, the paratroopers, ended up having to back down because the Vietnamese were trained so well, and their attack was unsuccessful. The second attempt was also another failed attempt because, like I said, the North Vietnamese, more specifically, the North Vietnamese 29th Regiment was the group that was kind of protecting the hill itself. They had an insane amount of training and background serving in different battles and wars. So when the United States sent their troops in, it was almost like no match for them initially. But after 11 different attempts, 10 failed attempts, the 11th one was successful for the United States, and the North Vietnamese finally backed down. And on May 20th of 1969, Hamburger Hill was officially captured by the United States. This is where kind of the controversy comes in, because on June 5th then, the United States abandoned Hamburger Hill because they realized that it had no significant value for their strategies in the war. It ultimately, like I said, their whole attempt was to take that hill to prevent the North Vietnamese to spread into the neighboring provinces. But once they actually captured it, after thousands and thousands of U.S. military deaths and losses, they actually realized that it didn't do that at all, and that's why it was so controversial. There's a lot of, through that time, there were a lot of the anti-war protests going on, and that was a big target for them because, like I said, the U.S. poured men into this battle, and 10 attempts were failures. 10 attempts, think about how many people had to have been killed in each attempt individually. The numbers, you can't even count the amount of soldiers that were at least injured in those battles. So that's kind of why it was so controversial itself. So I have a little bit of an interesting fact that I found during some of my research, that the name Hamburger Hill actually came from a 19-year-old sergeant. His name was James Spears, from the United States. And he was talking to a journalist. They were interviewing him. And he stated to the journalist, he said, "Have you ever been inside of a hamburger machine? We just got cut to pieces by extremely accurate machine gun fire." So that's kind of the journalists themselves made the name Hamburger Hill, but that's where they got it from, because of his description of it, which is a very gruesome and terrible description. But that's how it was at the time, and that's, like I said, why it's so controversial. And ultimately, like, that style and that controversy is what made the Vietnam War itself so controversial, because there were so many of these battles that just ended up in either defeats or, sorry, my dog, or just major losses of soldiers. And they ultimately, like, in the end, the United States lost the war itself. So all of these losses and all of these injuries and deaths, people thought were for nothing. They served a great purpose, which is a whole nother story itself. They did not die in vain, but that's kind of where the controversy stems from. So yeah, that is the Battle of Hamburger Hill.